Well, thank you very much for that too kind introduction. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman of the Board, graduates, friends, and family. Let me start by saying heartfelt congratulations to each of you graduating today and to those who share in your success. And congratulations on choosing psychology, sociology, and social work. Fine disciplines. They worked for me. That's, in fact, my background at Trent. You'd never guess by looking at or judging from my youthful appearance, but I graduated from Trent almost 5 decades ago. And reflecting on how the world has changed has caused me to think about the next decades ahead for you. In 1970, the war in Vietnam was raging. The world was bifurcated. The Cold War was at its height. We were divided between communism and capitalism as economic systems. Blacks, women, indigenous people lacked basic rights. Almost half of the world's population lived in poverty. Well, things have changed a lot, although there's still much to be done. But to me, the biggest changes that occurred were caused by the advent of the digital age. Back when I was at Trent, other than television, cars, and phones, there was no technology in our lives, and none of those were really digital. Televisions they weren't flat screens. They had cathode ray tubes. And it would be hard for you to imagine, but telephones had a wire connected to them, and they went to the wall, and they didn't do anything except you could talk on them sometimes. There were no computers at Trent anywhere, and nobody used computers except programmers. At Trent, our tuition payments were calculated using adding machines and calculators. And for my honors thesis in psychology, I figured that it would take me a year to analyze all the data. So I found a ticker tape connection at Trent to the only computer in Peterborough. It was at the GE factory. And I learned a programming language, and I programmed some basic statistical routines. And I remember that the computer analyzed all this data in 90 seconds. And I remember thinking, wow, these computers are going to be big. Now, I'm not telling you all of this as some kind of grandpa's fond memories of the good old days. Au contraire. I want you to think about how the world is changing and what that might mean for you. So, the whole digital thing really began to affect all of us in 1982, the year of the personal computer, IBM PC. And coincidentally, that was the year of my first book, 36 years ago, remember, 36. Flash forward 36 years into the future from today, where technology, flash forward to today, technology permeates everything. And most of you have a supercomputer in your pocket today. Now, the impact has not been all positive. Entire industries have been wiped out. Our privacy has been undermined. Big companies have captured the new asset class of the digital age, data, the new oil. And the benefits of the digital age have been asymmetrical. We have growing economies, but declining prosperities, wealth creation, but the middle class in many countries is shrinking. There's been a fragmentation of public discourse where we all follow our own point of view into little self-reinforcing echo chambers. And I'm sure you've all been at a restaurant and the table next to you, a family is sitting there and they're all looking at their mobile devices rather than talking to each other. And drones have not always been used to deliver parcels for Amazon, not always been used for good. But the changes in the last 36 years will pale compared to the changes that you will witness and create. And the reason is that growth in all of this is exponential. And that digital is moving on to, quote, the second half of the chessboard. Now, this is a clever phrase that was coined by American inventor and author Ray Kurzweil. And he tells the story of the Emperor of China, who was just delighted with the game of chess and invited the inventor to come into the palace. And he said, and I paraphrase, "I love this game. You can have any wish you want." And the inventor said, "Well, I'm a modest man. I'd just like some rice." Give me a single grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, 8 on the fourth. Just keep doubling, exponential growth. And the emperor wasn't that good at math, figured this was a few bags of rice, so granted the wish. When the court mathematicians got at it, though, he realized that he couldn't deliver because while small at the outset, the amount of rice escalates to more than 2 billion grains, 36 squares, halfway through the chessboard. And the final square, the 64th, would require 2 to the 64th grains of rice. That's a big number. 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion grains of rice, enough to cover all of planet Earth 6 inches deep. So imagine the effect of this exponential growth as in this year, 2018, 36 years later, we enter that second half of the chessboard. The next 36 years, or the last 36 years, will look like a little quaint blip compared to the massive changes that are coming in the next 36, doubling year after year. Think about technology that's quadrillions of times more important than that measly thing in your pocket today or in the Trent data center. Think about where we've been in the last 36 years as being an inch and where we're going being thousands of times taller than the Champlain Tower. So artificial intelligence devices will do things that we don't program them to do because they're capable of learning. There'll be no truck drivers or drivers of any kind replaced by autonomous vehicles. That'll happen in the next 15 years. Factories will be full of robots rather than people, and drones will be delivering parcels everywhere. You will star in movies. The holodeck from Star Trek will exist. We'll have technology throughout our bodies, replacing bones, organs, perhaps even part of our nervous systems. Blockchain, the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies, will eliminate stock markets, challenge the existence of banks and many other industries, including government. So most of today's industries, companies, and job types will not exist 36 years from now. So the implications for you are rather profound, but they don't need to be staggering. If we do this right, of course, we can eliminate poverty, many illnesses, probably even aging, turn back the tide on environmental destruction, and build new, more open democratic societies with peace and justice for all. If we do this wrong, well, let's just say the future could be very bleak. Think Skynet from the Terminator, okay? So the good news is that your Trent education has equipped you well to start this journey into the second half of the chessboard. So I'd like to end by giving you some advice. Think about how you can design your life. Make design choices today. I never thought about that when I graduated. I just figured I'm going to have a career. Well, don't let the future just happen. Participate in achieving a future that works for you, your family, your community, and the world by making some important choices right here, right now, today. And 3 points I'd like to make to close. First, design your strategy for lifelong learning. My colleagues and I entered the workforce with a knowledge base, and we kept up in our chosen field. I always figured I'd be a psychologist. I actually never was, even back then. But we thought that we were set for life. Well, today you know that that idea is laughable. If your degree marked a milestone in your knowledge only, you'd be set for, well, to use Andy Warhol's euphemism, 15 minutes. And if you took a technical course, a lot of what you learned in the first year is obsolete by the time you get to the fourth year. So I know you're celebrating a milestone today, but don't think that your higher education is completed. It's really just begun. Lifelong learning needs to be an assumption for you, and you will reinvent your knowledge base multiple times as you go through life. As graduates from a liberal arts and science university, you know that knowledge is important, but what really matters and what you've really acquired at Trent is your capabilities underlying knowledge, your capacity to think critically, to solve problems, to research, to collaborate, to put things in context, and your passion for learning, reinventing yourself again and again and again. So I also encourage you to design your media diet. By that, I mean that when I graduated, there were several TV stations, a couple of newspapers, and we relied on them. You could trust news sources like Walter Cronkite to tell the truth. Well, today you have millions of newspapers and TV stations and choices. So how are you going to inform yourself in a world where the old ways of doing that are collapsing? You'll need to further develop your BS detectors and make choices about how you'll interact with this avalanche of information. Don't be cynical about what you read, but think critically and skeptically. The antidote for information overload is to develop your personal filters. And don't just scan. Read articles, like from the beginning to the end every day. Number 2, design your vocation in ways that I never did. When I graduated from Trent, students went to work for a big company. And IBM, GM, consulting companies were all lined up outside. You wanted to get a job with a big bank or be a teacher, government employee. Well, today these options are less feasible as hiring in those areas has declined. Now, you will all get jobs. The research shows that. And there are new choices for you. And the big one is a forklift driver. No, the big one is to be an entrepreneur. And research shows that new jobs come from relatively new companies. So entrepreneurship is actually key to jobs. There's a lesson here for you. Look for opportunities to join smaller companies or companies that cross over between the private sector and civil society. Or do the unthinkable. Explore the idea of creating your own business. It's easier to do that these days because small companies can have all the capabilities of big companies without the main liabilities. Now, parents, don't panic here. I'm not suggesting that your children throw caution to the wind and ask you to mortgage your house to fund their big idea. And typically it makes sense for you to get some work experience to develop an idea, a business plan, and connections to make it happen. But you might be one of the new generation of business builders in Canada who will make a real difference in achieving prosperity in this country. Or by being a social entrepreneur where you do well by doing good at the same time. And that brings me to my final point. Design your life as a citizen. You know, today your degree from Trent does equip you well for thinking, and collaborating, and learning. So as you leave these hallowed halls, by all means, as Spock would say, live long and prosper. Build a successful and prosperous life for yourself and your families. Most of you will do that. But let me argue that humanity and Canada needs more of you. You know, as you travel through the second half of the chessboard, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that just about everything we know about civilization will change. You'll be the generation to lead in the rebuilding of our institutions, of our economy, and of our society, and hopefully of a reindustrialization of planet Earth to protect this little planet from its inevitable destruction if we keep going the way that we're going. So you'll need to participate in big change in your workplace, community, country, causes you join as a global citizen. And you will need to teach your children well. One simple thing you can do is vote. I've just come back from some parts of the world where young people your age would actually die to have the right to vote and have some kind of control over their future. But all around the world today, young people are cynical about our political institutions. A lot of young people agree with the bumper sticker, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." And when you look at the behavior of a lot of politicians, it's sort of understandable. But don't give up on democracy, because the alternatives for you and your families and loved ones are really undesirable. So I encourage you to be a political person, political with a small p, for starters, by voting in every election that comes along. And as President Groark has mentioned, today is an auspicious occasion. It's the day of your graduation. It's also the day of an election in Ontario. And your generation is actually the largest voting bloc now. You will determine the outcome of this election if you vote, but also the outcome of most elections for the better part of this century. So with great responsibility, or great power, comes great responsibility. I seem to be making a lot of movie references. But you can make this the perfect day by voting. Canada needs your good judgment, your critical thinking, your passion, and your demographic muscle to ensure that this smaller country that your children inherit is a better one. Actually, I've never been more optimistic about the future, because I believe that we are in the early days of a new civilization, enabled by a new technological and communications revolution, and forged by you. A new generation of young people who do think differently around the world. Each of you can participate in this renaissance, and because of that, it's surely an amazing time to graduate and an amazing time to be alive. So hopefully you'll have the wisdom and the will to seize the time and design your life to make it work for you and for our collective future. Godspeed to each of you. Thank you.